So, Jason, thanks for coming back on the show and talking with us. Remind everybody who you are.
Hi, Eddie. It's so great to be here. I'm Jason Brick. I'm the host of Satan's Family on the Block. I'm the author of the book of the same name, as well as the book There I Was When Nothing Happened, which is a collection of stories of violence prevention by violence professionals. And I've been doing the podcast for the last 4 years, so almost coming on to 5 years now. Before that, I spent half my adult life as a martial arts instructor, security consultant, did a little bouncing, a little bodyguard work. And then the most recent half of my adult life as a journalist. And Satan's Family on the Block kind of crosses those streams, applying what I know about security and what I know about interviewing experts into finding better ways to protect my family and protect your family.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I have the copy of your book over here, or the There I Was When Nothing Happened, because I know that in that collection of stories are probably the most handsome people that you could have talked to get to collaborate on that book. So I was very thankful to be a part of that.
Excellent. Yeah, it was really fun to collect those stories because one of the things I'm sure you've noticed as well is that the most dangerous people in the world are also the kindest and the most generous with the knowledge they've gained. And it was just really good to get to talk to and meet some of these people who contributed to the stories.
Right. You know, you said that to me once in one of our conversations that we had, and that has always stuck with me because if somebody is acting tough and they're always kind of like mean, I have to wonder that there's more bark than bite here. But you and I both know Randy King, and like he is probably one of the kindest people you'll ever meet
Yeah.
that can beat you up. So it holds true, I think.
Yeah. So one of those little kept secrets of the martial arts and self-defense crowd, because you kind of expect them to be, have the Cobra Kai, but they're all Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, that's true. That is
Yeah.
true. So it's been a while since you and I have sat
Yeah.
down and talked. Like, kind of
Mhm.
catch us up on what you've been doing because you've been doing some pretty interesting stuff.
Sure thing. So, we spoke pretty early in the life cycle of Safest Family on the Block before the book got published. And, the book, Safest Family on the Block, this is actually the first edition, which I self-published. It has recently been picked up by YMA Publishing. And so this is actually out of print. I have a couple of copies of that. The new edition's coming out this spring. And what that was the whole point of the podcast was for me to talk to experts, not just about, crime prevention kind of safety, but fire prevention, how to stock a first aid kit. I had a suicide counselor and a nutritionist on the show. All these aspects of family safety, which, although it's fun to get range time, it's fun to get on the mat and do martial arts. We're middle class, middle aged guys who live in North America. It's not a mugger or a home invasion that's going to get most of us. It's a heart attack. It's texting while driving. It's mental illness, suicide, and depression. Those are the risks that our kids really realistically face. And so I wanted to talk to the people who could teach me about that the way that my martial arts instructors taught me how to kick and punch. And this book was the 101 best little tidbits that I was able to glean from 100 episodes of the show. And so that's come out, and that was really fun. And then we'll talk about this a lot today. My family just got back from spending a year in Crete, where I applied a lot of this stuff and is actually researching the second book, which will be Safest Family in the World, which is about travel safety and safety while you're abroad, whether you're driving to grandma's house on Thanksgiving or going to Zimbabwe.
Yeah, Jason. So you've been up to a lot of cool stuff. As a matter of fact, I downloaded your book that is now out of print. So it's really cool because it's sitting on my Kindle and I've read it and there's a lot of great information in it. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about your travel abroad and kind of talk to you more about that. But what inspired you to like pick up your family and move from, North America where we were just talking about, where it's relatively safer, and leaving and going and living in a place like Crete? What was the driving force behind that?
Long story made short, my favorite aunt, when she was 50 years old, she sold all of her stuff and moved to Japan as a birthday present to herself. Lived there for 12 years. I graduated from college when she'd been there about 3 years, and she was on the phone to me about once a month. You're not married, you don't have kids. I'll get you a job. Come live in Japan for a while. And I lived there for 2 years. Interestingly, the second year, I actually had a job coaching the karate team at a local high school, which is a really interesting experience. I'll put it that way. But going and spending significant time abroad in a place where you don't speak the language, where you don't look like everybody else, it makes you a bigger, better, braver human being. I mean, everybody's traveled a couple of weeks, 2 weeks of travel just broadens your mind and your horizons so much. Really digging into the culture for a year or more is that on steroids, as it were. And it was so good for me that I always wanted that for my kids. And as it turned out, I met my wife while I was over there. Well, my ex-wife now, but the woman I married, she actually grew up in a town 90 minutes south of where I grew up. But we both met there in Japan. So both of us valued travel a great deal. And then in 2014, when our oldest child was 14 and our youngest was 4, we spent a year in Malaysia so that they could have that experience. And it was so good for our oldest son. But the 4-year-old only remembered a little bit. So we knew that it was time. So when 8th grade came for our youngest, my new wife and I, we went and spent a year abroad. Crete specifically happened because of the way my career has gone. I know a lot of bodyguards and I know a lot of travel writers. It's a weird little confluence of
It is. Yeah.
yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So I asked a bunch of them. I decided, I've done Asia. I've never really been to Europe. So I asked them, hey, if you spent a year in Europe, where would you go? And about 40% of them said Greece, and about 40% of them said Portugal, and the other 20% said all kinds of other places. Greece is more centrally located, it's closer to more things. So you can, it's a better base camp, as it were, for travel. So then I came back and said, okay, it's Greece. Where would you live if you spent a year in Greece? And they all said Crete. Specifically, they all said Hania, Crete, which is a city on the north coast, about 2/3 of the way towards the west side of the island. And they did not steer us wrong.
Very cool. So just real quick, I've never been to Crete. Tell me one of the things that you really appreciated about the culture of the people there. What was one of the things that you just really enjoyed?
So it's mellow and slow and gentle. And that was one thing it was really, because I was looking for ways to grow my own self and paying attention to the culture, that I'm not a gentle human. Our martial arts were kind, but I tend to be kind of hard driving, but very busy, not particularly kind to myself when I make mistakes, and just trying to live by example and take that and intake that gentleness, that slower pace, that what would I say, prioritization of quality time. A really good example is it's really hard to get your check there when you go out to eat, because they think coming and asking you if you're ready or bringing you the check is hurrying you along. That that it would be rude of them to give any signal that we're not welcome to just camp out there for the rest of the day. And it took me 3 or 4 weeks to just kind of adjust to not getting a little frustrated when I was ready to leave and I couldn't catch the waiter's eye to get the check.
Yeah, that's cool. Because I feel like a lot of times I get hurried out of. I've been kicked out of plenty of restaurants for taking too long. So that's awesome. So when you were preparing to leave the United States and go to Europe, what preparations were you making to secure your home, your property back in the U.S.? How did you manage that?
So we lucked out in a particular way. That same aunt I mentioned, when she came back to the States, she rented a room in our house for a little while she was getting settled. And we got along so well, she's still here. And we have a nephew who's also renting a room while he goes to college. And by coincidence, my mother is still working. She closed out a contract out of town and they wanted to move back to the area about the same time we were leaving. So they just rented the master suite in our house. So I was able to rent the place to trusted people, which helped a lot. But also, they're older and all of that. So we upgraded our camera network and we set up a couple of systems about how to contact us or contact safety resources here in town that I know in case there was an issue while we were gone.
Yeah, that sounded like it worked out to be able to have, trusted family in your home and to make sure upgrading your system and all that. That was really good. One of the biggest things that I worry about when I travel when I travel abroad is keeping up with my important documents, because I'm always like, oh man, if I lose my passport, I'm in a whole lot of trouble. Yeah. What did you do to secure your important documents while you were traveling?
So there's two kinds of those documents, right? One of those is your marriage certificate, birth certificate, wills and stuff, the stuff you're leaving at home. And that went in a safe here, and with copies of that, scanned copies on a not flash drive, but on the cloud, so that if there were a fire that burned down the house, there'd still be copies available. Now, coming abroad, the papers that you need abroad, which are any documents that you need to finish processing your visa and your passports, of course, credit cards, those things. Secure is the wrong word because you take basic care, but the real thing is you want accessibility. If your passport gets dipped on the subway, you still need access to your passport. So we had, the physical copies, we had photocopies, we had flash drive with scanned copies of everything, and we had them backed up on the cloud. Because
And
if you're traveling and you lose a passport and you don't have access, it is a really bad day.
right. And, even, traveling before all these cloud documents and all these backups were available, that is such a great gift to be able to have
Yeah.
digital copies of all of that stuff and be able to access it. So that's a really good tip. You
And
and
as
I,
as a as a hint
Mhm.
on that, if you found you didn't do that and you find yourself in a crack, if you're in any country that requires a visa to enter, the whole way that you process that visa, if you're just kind of stuck, you almost certainly emailed a copy of your passport either to the immigration people for that country or to an agent who helped you with it. So if you're in a crack, go search your email on your phone for passports, and you'll probably find it there.
That is a great tip. That is a great tip. Yeah, that's awesome. A good way to remember it, and it's always going to be accessible as long as you can get to your email address.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you and I understand situational awareness, and
Yeah.
we understand human behavior. So I'm going to ask you kind of two
Mhm.
questions in one here. What was similar about your situational awareness when you were in Crete as to the United States, and then what was different, and what did you learn from that?
Those are really good questions, and it kind of also approaches how we can learn and develop the habits of situational awareness in real life. One of the problems with awareness training is, unfortunately, most of the people who teach situational awareness, these are high level operators, Navy SEALs, military, police, and the advice they can give for developing situational awareness generally boils down to live in a job where if you're not aware, you die for about 10 or 15 years, and you will have developed a habit of awareness, which is true, but not very useful to us minivan dads and soccer moms.
Right.
Right. Uh, One of the best things we can do is to play awareness games by ourselves with our kids. Things, little contests like as you're walking into the restaurant, you make a little like a push-up bet about whether the car next to your car is going to be the same car when you come out. And then you note enough details about the car that when you come out, you can tell. Things like that. Or, playing the games where you sit in a crowd with a small child who you're teaching about how to approach a stranger for help. Say, okay, if I wasn't here, you needed help finding me. Which person in this restaurant would you go to for help and why? And then you talk about why that person seemed safe. And there's many, many games we can play. And there's one you were kind enough to send me the questions ahead of time, and I've got one that I'll bring up later as well. But and making it a game, because neuroscience shows us that we learn better or train more when we're gaining information in a game. And also it's fun. And that's the other piece that's really important, I think, is that, the head on a swivel, back to the wall, situational awareness, Cooper color codes thing is effective when you have a job where you go out on patrol and then come back and can stop. Being in condition yellow 24/7 as a parent is exhausting and doesn't work.
Right.
So instead of coming at this from that kind of tactical standpoint, coming and taking a page from Thich Nhat Hanh and just being mindfully aware of the world, just looking around, because you will spot the bad guy, but you'll also see the puppy that wants a pat, and you'll see the sunset.
Right. Yeah, I think one time in one of our conversations, you said you just kind of need to be tactically curious, and
Yes.
that's also stuck with me. Over time, it's saying, you know what, that's cool because that describes a lot of what I'm doing. I'm like, okay, that car is parked there. Why is that? What is those? What are those stickers on the car? What does that mean? That sort of thing. And you just kind of go down this rabbit hole of something in your environment that has caught your attention, and you try to learn from it. And then there's a baseline set for if you see that pattern again in the future. So, yeah, that's awesome.
And that gets right into the ways that it's different, because you continue to play those games, continue to bring those habits when you travel. However, baselines changed.
Right.
And for example, in Crete in the Mediterranean, the baseline volume and speed of talking sounds aggressive and angry. And so you'd hear some, a couple having a conversation the next thing over that is definitely a, hey, what's going on there kind of impulse. And, or for example, in London, the baseline direction you have to look when you cross the street is different.
Sure.
So these things, and on top of that, when you travel, you're tired. My wife and I noticed we slept about an average of 2 hours extra a night because just the little bit, the disorientation and stress of not being in your own spaces, it's fatiguing. And so you have to deal with those in different ways. And one is, give yourself more breaks, trade off who's responsible for what with the other people you're traveling with. And then the most important thing about baseline is watching the locals. Because you don't know if that bar's safe, but the locals do. So if you walk into a space and there's no families there, go to a different space.
Right. Good point. Right? Very good point.
If you're sitting and having lunch and all of a sudden everybody got up and leaves, go with them.
Yeah. True.
Right? And so, so paying attention, shifting what you pay attention to because you don't know the cues. One of the ways when I teach classes on this, one of the ways I explain it is that if you walk into a loud bar, the loudness of that bar does not mean it's dangerous or safe. If you walk into a quiet bar, the quietness doesn't mean it's loud or safe or dangerous. It's still early here. But if you walk into a bar that you know is usually raucous, maybe it's a heavy metal club, and it's really quiet, it's time to pay attention. If you're in a quiet bar that suddenly gets loud, it's time to pay attention. And so those kind of cues, watching those changes, watching how the locals react will give you some of that experience that we have at home.
Very cool. You talked about the stress that comes with traveling, not being in your normal space, sleeping longer, things like that. If we encounter an emergency or a crisis while we're abroad, what tips do you have to help us manage that kind of a situation?
So the first thing on that is we're not managing emergencies during the emergency. We manage those emergencies months in advance, if possible. There's an interesting concept called discretionary time, which is how much time you have between right now and when it's too late to act. And so if I'm doing research on a destination, and for example, let's say the emergency is a car accident and someone's injured. Months before I go, I have researched travel safety in that country. I've made sure that the emergency number is 911, and if it's not, I've written it on a piece of tape and put the emergency number on the back of my phone. I've looked into those things. I found out what kind of cars are there and see if I can rent a car that will have a first aid kit with it, or if I have to pack one. All of those things. And I've done that months in advance. So there's months of time between acting and needing to do it. Whereas if I'm trying to figure that out in real time, there's a lot to figure out very fast.
Right.
And researching things like in traffic accidents, how is that country? Is that a country where people are going to be polite and on top of things, or is that a country where you might get shot? Greg Ellifritz tells a story in his book, Choose Adventure, about being on a bus that got in a wreck. And apparently, either by law or tradition, the way they figured out whose fault the wreck was the drivers had a fist fight on the side of the road.
Sure. Why not? Yeah.
And that was what determined responsibility for the accident, apparently. So learning those things ahead of time. Right.
All right.
A really good what's the word I'm looking for? A really good resource for some of that, besides your safe traveler write-ups and all of that, is get on Facebook and do a search for destination expat. For viewers who are not familiar, expat stands for expatriate. Is people from another country who live long term in a new place, most of the time English speaking people. And so these are people who've lived there long enough to get a sense of it and also have the context of somebody who has learned it from another perspective. And there will be an expat group for almost every destination you'll want to go to. And you can just pop in there. They're very generous with their time and information. Pop in there, say, hey, we're going to visit for a couple of weeks. What should I know? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, long story short, the way you deal with those emergencies is have your research in place ahead of time, have a plan for that, and then to practice that plan with your family where everybody has a role.
I like that. Making sure that everybody has a role, everybody know,
Yeah.
because that's just empowering enough.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, dad will take care of everything or mom will take care of everything. It's like, oh, dad will do this, mom will do this, I will do this as a kid, that sort of thing. I really like that for making sure that everybody in the family knows what to do in the event that something goes wrong.
Everybody should have a role. It's hugely important. Partially because, like you say, it's empowering to your child to participate. I also think it's the best way to talk to our kids about dangerous things. Because if we just say, "Hey, here's a dangerous thing," and leave them helpless, they're just going to be scared. But if that here's a dangerous thing, and this is what dad's going to do about it, this is what mom's going to do about it, or dad or mom or whoever, and this is what you're going to do about it. That is a much better way to approach the scary parts of life. And then also, one of the things that often happens, I wouldn't say often, but too often happens in emergency situations is dad's distracted, mom's distracted, little guy's got nothing to do. And so they wander off and get into additional trouble.
Mm,
Whether they just you lose track of them for 10 minutes and get that extra stress and fear on top of everything, or whether they go wander onto a railroad track not paying attention.
right.
So if they have a specific role to do and know what that role is, that's not going to happen.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good.
And
That's
then
good.
finally, and this is a little heavy for a Friday morning, but if everything goes terribly wrong and we end up in the middle of a terrorist event or a major natural catastrophe and the worst possible thing happens, I would rather my child die empowered and active and trying than confused and afraid.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that I've thought about too. And you're right; it's a heavy topic, but it's something that we've all talked about, or we've all
Yeah.
thought about, and we need to talk about it.
Right.
In when your kid's life is on the line, how do you want them to respond?
Yeah.
That's huge. So yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. So as a traveler, how can you in your best ability mitigate like the risk that comes during transportation, whether that's by car, a plane, a train, a boat? What is it that we can, and I know they're all different, they are all different, like what are some things that we can do to make sure that we're as safe as possible in transportation?
Sure thing. And again, first thing again is doing the research. A really classic example is bribery. Go into the country knowing that if you get pulled over, whether you're going to go to jail for bribing somebody or whether you get beat up and sent to jail for not bribing.
Exactly.
It's a small thing, but everybody knows about their countries where, yeah, that's the thing. So knowing that ahead of time, knowing what the scams are, there are a lot of transportation scams. Often it's just somebody who says they're a cabbie, but they're not a cabbie, but they know that you don't know that it doesn't cost $200 to get from the airport to your hotel. And sometimes they're more sinister. But again, those internet forums will tell you exactly what the scams are and looking that kind of thing up. Another one to look at is find out the DUI situation. There are a lot of countries where they do not particularly enforce DUI against caddies. So knowing that ahead of time and just researching those things, finding those things so you can develop a plan for those risks. And then when you're into public transportation, you want to lower your profile. You want to make sure that you're going to be noticed. You can't gray man this stuff because you're a foreigner. You're going to be noticed.
Right.
But you dress down. If you have to count money, always count money in the bathroom. Go into a stall, sit down, do it there, and just keep like $10 worth of local money in your pocket for small things. That way, no one's looking at the big wad you got at the exchange place at the airport or whatever. Don't do that at the airport, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Stay off your phone so that you're aware, alert, and people see you're alert and aware. With one exception, if you're in a cab and you're feels or Uber or what have you, and you feel even the littlest bit sketched out, over your phone, put on the Waze, have the cabbie see you looking at the route and supervising them. If you are a woman traveling alone in a cab and you get any kind of weird vibes, pick up your phone, call your own number, and say, "Hey, honey, yeah, I'm in the cab now. Dropping in, John's being really nice to me. It's great. Yeah, I'll be at the hotel. And what do you think?" 10 minutes? Yeah, about 10 minutes. So those are some times that you can use your phone. But other than that, phone stays in the pocket. You're up, you're alert, you're looking around, you're making yourselves as least attractive target as possible.
Right. Yeah, and you make the point that, we are as Americans, as we travel different places, we are going to stick out. I mean, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure you stuck out when you lived in Japan,
Oh, yeah.
that sort of stuff. So
This is the first time I was tall in my life. I like
I figured. But yeah, so like that's just kind of a like, well, I'm just gonna own it. I look different, so I'm just gonna kind of have to go with the flow here, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing we can do is, awareness. We're getting back to awareness. And I promised an awareness game earlier, and I'm going to tell a story that makes me look silly about it from when I was in London, where there's a game I played with myself on public transportation for years, where you sit down, you scan, you're going to ask, so you're going to identify 4 people. You're going to identify the person who's most likely to cause trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even if you're not in a subway car full of librarian nuns. You find a nun with a teardrop tattoo, whatever. Doesn't matter if they're actually going to cause trouble, the most likely.
Mm-hmm.
The most likely to be trouble. And then you find the one that's most likely to cause trouble. For example, if the one that's most likely to be trouble is the largest of that gang of 22-year-old guys, the most likely to cause trouble is the 22-year-old girl who just walked in a miniskirt. Because she's going to be the impetus for the trouble. And then you look for the most dangerous person in the car, who's usually neither of those first people. And then finally, the person I go to for help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's real tactical, and you feel real. So we're in the subway in London with my wife, and I explained, and I'm telling her this, right? Yeah, this is me condescendingly telling my wife, who grew up in a major city, how to be safe on the subway. My stupid ass, but and I get done, and she goes, "Oh, the zombie game." Think, the what now? Yeah. So when I'm in the subway, I just decide I look around, and if there was a zombie apocalypse, who would be on my team?
Nice.
It's much better. Much better. Getting back to that mindful awareness thing from earlier, it is a much better way of doing it, even though it's not tactical,
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
And just playing that game when you're on public transportation, wherever it is, you're almost never actually going to use that information, but it broadcasts awareness to anybody who might be looking for a victim.
Very cool.
And that gets to, the most important fairy tale for personal safety, I feel, is the Three Billy Goats Gruff.
Okay, remind everybody what that one is.
So the Three Billy Goats Gruff is the one where the billy goats are crossing the bridge, and the troll comes out from the bridge. And first the baby goat comes, and the troll's like, "I'll eat you up." And he says, "Don't eat me. My mommy's bigger and fatter and more delicious." And he says, "Okay, go ahead." And then the mom comes. "Well, don't eat me. My husband's bigger and fatter, and he's coming along soon." Go ahead. And then the dad shows up and kicks the troll's ass. And that's the story, right?
Right.
But you want to look like somebody the troll don't want to eat. You want them to go bother somebody else. And, you can kind of feel bad about the other person, but if we're all looking like that, then the troll's going to die of starvation or what have you. So if you're on the public transportation, which is where a lot of criminals acquire their targets in tourist areas, and you're seen to be not wearing particularly nice clothing, you left your Rolex at home, you're maybe traveling with your last phone, the one that's been sitting in a desk drawer for 2 years unused. You're not sitting there counting your money. You're not staring at your phone. You're looking around, looking at each person, clearly making decisions and analysis. The bad guy who's looking for someone to pick on is going to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, like one of those things that I always do, like I play similar games to the zombie game here, which I think just is hilarious that that's what she does. It's very smart of her. But I'll also, like, when I look around, nobody else looks back. And so one very awkward time, I was traveling and I had stopped off at a Wendy's and a gas station. It's very busy, and I'm looking around, and there's another guy looking around, and we make eye contact, and it was like, who are you and what are you doing and why are you looking around when nobody else is looking around? So it's very rare that sort of stuff happens, but it's just kind of odd when it does.
Yeah. And often you make that eye contact with these just little moments.
Like, yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So, as we wrap up here, for people who are nervous about traveling, and they don't necessarily want to leave the comfort of home. The world's changed a lot since, pandemics and lockdowns and all that sort of stuff. What do you tell those kind of folks to encourage them to say, step out of your comfort zone? You never know what you're going to see. What would you say to somebody like that?
So the first thing is that the world is much safer than we've been led to believe. Even places where you wouldn't imagine going, like El Salvador, Guatemala,
Yeah.
they're sketchy. Don't get me wrong,
Right.
but there are ways to travel almost anywhere and be safe. And whether that's a tour group, a guided tour, like when I was traveling in Guatemala with my brother, we went on hikes that came with an armed guard.
Mm,
You should be walking along, enjoying the mountains, and there's a guy with an M16 10 paces behind you. And there are places that require that. So you find the way to stay safe while you go do the cool and adventurous thing.
very cool.
A trick that you can use is also drafting. You guys are familiar with drafting from racing and swimming, right? And driving,
Yeah.
where the swimmer's behind the person and the water pressure, the air pressure is reduced because this person's in front, so it's a little easier. So if you're wandering around in a city you're not particularly familiar with, go walk near enough to another group of tourists that you're not freaking them out, but it looks like you're a part of them. Or if you see a tour group, follow them. There's a lot of people. There's at least one local that knows what's going on, and they're probably going somewhere interesting. So those are some of the go travel. It is much safer than you're led to believe, and there are many solutions, most of which you already know and already do at home.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you so much for all of that, Jason. I appreciate it. Thank you for being on the show. If people want to find out more about you, your book, The Safest Family on the Block, where do they need to go to find you?
Absolutely. So our website is safestfamilyontheblock.org. Our show is on YouTube, Safest Family on the Block. You can find me on Facebook. Safest Family on the Block has a small group there, or just look for the Jason Brick. Then there's 3 or 4 of us, but I'm the only one that talks about martial arts and tabletop role playing games and heavy metal almost every day. So yeah, I'll be easy to spot.
Very good.
And I love nerding out about this. So if anybody has questions, please do reach out, and I'm happy to talk to you about anything safety related or heavy metal related or tabletop role playing games related.
Very good, Jason. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, buddy.
Thank you so much, Andy. Talk to you soon.